Alright, I spent way too much time on Reddit this week, and somehow these were the stories I ended up with. So, let's get into it. Let's start with this one. I found it over on r/relationships, and the title immediately caught my attention. I found a second phone taped inside our air vent. What I found on it wasn't what I expected at all. Sorry this got long. I've been sitting on it for 2 days and just need to get it out somewhere. We've been married 6 years. Doing some maintenance on our HVAC system last week, I reached into the vent to clear some dust and felt something taped up inside, way further back than any normal buildup would be. Pulled out an old phone, fully charged somehow, password protected. I sat with it for 2 days before finally guessing the password, our anniversary date, which honestly should have told me something right there. Also random, but the phone case is the exact same one I bought him for Christmas 2 years ago. No idea if that matters. Probably doesn't. What I found wasn't text to another woman. It was an entire folder of messages between my husband and a number saved simply as Dad. His father supposedly died when he was 19, before I ever met him. A story he's told consistently our entire relationship, complete with a grave we've actually visited together twice. The messages on this phone go back 4 years. Birthday check-ins. Updates about our wedding. A message from 3 months ago that just says, "She still doesn't know, and I don't know how to fix that now." I don't know if the man buried in that grave is actually his father, or someone else entirely, or if his real father is quietly still alive somewhere, and my husband's been talking to him this entire time behind a decision I don't understand yet. I haven't confronted him. I don't even know what question to ask first. See, this is where the story completely lost me. The second she found that phone, I was already thinking, okay, here comes the affair. That's where every story like this usually goes. But instead, it's messages to someone who's supposed to be dead. And honestly, I think that's way more unsettling. Imagine being married to someone for 6 years, visiting your father-in-law's grave together, believing that chapter of their life was over, only to find out they've been talking to him the entire time. That's not just one lie. That's years of carefully keeping 2 different realities alive at once. The part I can't stop thinking about is that message. She still doesn't know, and I don't know how to fix that now. That doesn't sound like someone who's enjoying the lie. It sounds like someone who's buried themselves so deep in it that they genuinely have no idea how to tell the truth anymore. Now, before everyone jumps straight to calling him a monster, I do think there's a huge difference between someone hiding an affair and someone hiding a family secret they've carried since they were a kid. We don't know if his dad abandoned him, if there was abuse, if there was some kind of legal issue, or if he was just too ashamed to ever admit the truth. None of that excuses lying for 6 years, but it definitely changes how I'd look at the situation. If I were her, I wouldn't even start with accusations. I'd honestly just put the phone on the table and ask one question. Who is he? Because I have a feeling whatever answer comes next completely changes everything she thought she knew about her husband. Alright. This next one is completely different, but somehow just as messed up. I found this over on r/confessions, and the title alone made me wonder where it was going. I've had an entire second identity in another city for 3 years. I just found out someone else built one around me. Throwaway, obviously. I travel for work about 1 week a month, always the same city. 3 years ago, I started using a slightly different version of my name there. Told people I met I was single, built an entirely separate social circle, even dated someone there for almost a year without her knowing anything about my actual life back home. It's never been about the people, honestly. It's been about having a version of my life with zero history attached to it. 2 weeks ago, the woman I'd been seeing there, Marin, told me she needed to tell me something before things went further. She said she'd actually looked me up months earlier. My real name, my real city, everything. After noticing an old scar that didn't match a story I'd told her. She's known my actual identity, marriage included, for 4 months. She never confronted me. Instead, she said she'd quietly built her own version of the relationship around what she already knew was temporary, timed to end exactly when my usual travel contract wrapped up in another 2 months, specifically so neither of us would have to have this exact conversation. The only reason she told me now is she's met someone else in her real life, someone unconnected to any of this, and didn't want to start that relationship with an unresolved lie of her own still active. I built an entire secret life to escape consequences, and somehow ended up as the one who got played by someone managing the exact same kind of double life I thought only I was running. Okay, I did not see that coming. This guy spent 3 years thinking he was the one in control. Fake name, fake life, fake relationship. He thought nobody had figured it out. Then she casually tells him she's known the truth for 4 months. That's got to be one of the biggest reality checks I've ever heard. And honestly, I kind of respect how she handled it. She didn't start a fight. She didn't try to expose him. She just quietly accepted that the relationship had an expiration date and planned her own exit. That's a level of emotional maturity I wasn't expecting from this story. At the same time, though, none of that really lets this guy off the hook. I think the bigger question isn't why she stayed quiet. It's why he felt the need to create an entirely different identity in the first place. Because let's be honest, this was never just about using a different name. He built a whole second life where none of the responsibilities from his real one existed. And when you get comfortable pretending to be someone else for that long, it's probably a sign you're trying to escape something a lot bigger than just your marriage. The ironic part is, he thought he was the only one keeping secrets. Turns out she was keeping one too. The difference is, her secret was about protecting herself. His was about protecting the lie. And I think that's what makes this story hit so differently. Alright, let's move on, because this next one is a completely different kind of mess. I found this over on r/AITA, and the title immediately made me curious. AITA for telling my stepdad he's not in my mom's will, right in front of his kids? There's more to it than I originally said. This is kind of a follow-up to something I posted a while back, adding context I left out originally because I wasn't ready to get into it. My mom passed last year. Before she died, she updated her will to leave everything split between me and my 2 half-siblings, specifically excluding my stepdad from inheriting the house, since it had been in our family for 3 generations, something she'd always been firm about regardless of marriage. At a recent family dinner, my stepdad started talking to his adult kids about when the house eventually passes to us. I corrected him on the spot in front of everyone, told him plainly he's not in the will regarding the house. He was humiliated, said I embarrassed him in front of his own children. What I didn't mention originally is why I reacted the way I did. Going through my mom's private papers a few weeks earlier, I found out my stepdad had actually asked her, twice, in the final year of her life while she was heavily medicated, to add his name to the deed. She'd declined both times, according to her own handwritten notes, clearly frustrated and worried enough to write it down as a record. He knew, going into that dinner, that he'd asked and been refused, twice, while she was at her most vulnerable. After I confronted him at dinner, he went quiet for a moment, then said something that's been sitting with me since. He said my mom actually changed her mind 3 weeks before she passed, told him directly she was going to have the will updated to include him after all, and that the only reason it never happened was because she died before the appointment with her lawyer that was already scheduled for the following week. He has no proof beyond his word, no note, no witness, nothing my mom ever put in writing to match her earlier documented refusals. I don't know if he's lying to save face after being humiliated, or if my mom genuinely changed her mind at the very end and simply ran out of time to make it official. Okay, this one is actually a lot harder than it sounds. At first, I was completely on the daughter's side. Then that last detail came up, and suddenly I wasn't so sure anymore. Here's the problem. There are really only 2 possibilities. Either the stepdad is making that whole story up because he got embarrassed in front of his kids, or her mom genuinely changed her mind at the very end and just never got the chance to update the paperwork. Personally, I'm still leaning toward the first one, mainly because the only actual evidence we have is your mom's handwritten notes saying she turned him down twice. On the other hand, his entire argument basically comes down to, "Trust me, she changed her mind." That's a pretty big claim with nothing to back it up. That said, I also don't think you can completely rule his version out. People do change their minds near the end of their lives, and sometimes they just run out of time before making things official. I think that's what makes this story so frustrating. We'll probably never know what your mom actually intended in those final weeks, and honestly, that uncertainty is something everyone involved might just have to live with. Alright, this next one is probably my favorite from today's batch. It starts off sounding like a simple inheritance dispute, and then it goes somewhere I never would have guessed. This was posted over on r/relationships. My grandmother left her entire estate to a woman none of us had ever met. We finally found out why. Long post, sorry, but I think the details actually matter here. My grandmother passed a few months ago, fairly wealthy, and the family always assumed the estate would be split evenly among her 3 children. When the will was read, everything went to a woman named Carol none of us had ever heard of. No explanation given beyond her full legal name. We tracked down Carol through the lawyer. She was my grandmother's college roommate for exactly 1 year over 60 years ago, before they apparently lost contact. Carol herself was stunned. Hadn't spoken to my grandmother in over 40 years. What changed everything was a box of letters Carol still had, saved for 6 decades, that she brought to our second meeting. They weren't just friendship letters. My grandmother had confided in Carol, and only Carol, about a baby she'd given up for adoption at 19, before she ever met my grandfather, a secret she apparently never told a single person in our actual family, across 60 years of marriage and raising 3 children. Carol had spent years quietly helping my grandmother search for that child through the decades, using contacts and resources of her own, and had apparently found something conclusive just 8 months before my grandmother passed. Information she'd delivered to her in person on a visit none of us knew had ever happened. Carol wouldn't tell us what that information actually was. Said my grandmother made her promise, specifically, never to share it with the family unless the person she'd found ever came looking on their own first. When we pushed, Carol got visibly uncomfortable and said only that it wasn't the kind of ending anyone was hoping for, and that some things my grandmother decided were better left as a private closure than a family discovery. She then declined to meet with us again. We don't know if that means the search ended in tragedy, or in a rejection, or in something about my grandfather none of us are prepared for. All we have is an estate handed to a stranger, and a promise she's apparently keeping more carefully than my grandmother kept the secret itself for 60 years. Okay, this story ended up being so much deeper than I expected. At first, it just sounded like another family fighting over an inheritance. But by the end, the inheritance almost didn't matter anymore. Carol wasn't just some old friend who randomly inherited everything. She was the one person your grandmother trusted with the biggest secret of her entire life. That's a pretty incredible level of trust when you think about it. The part that really stuck with me, though, was when Carol said, "It wasn't the kind of ending anyone was hoping for." I don't know why, but that one sentence says so much without actually saying anything. It doesn't sound like your grandmother found the happy reunion she'd been searching for. It sounds like she finally got an answer, and the answer itself was heartbreaking. And honestly, I kind of respect Carol for keeping that promise. I know the family wants answers, and I completely understand why. But if your grandmother trusted her enough to carry that secret for decades, I can also understand why she's refusing to break that trust now. If I were in their position, I'd be curious too. But I'd also be careful. Because sometimes the mystery is easier to live with than the truth. And judging by Carol's reaction, I have a feeling the truth isn't something anyone in that family is actually prepared to hear. Now this one, I genuinely had to read twice because I couldn't believe what I was reading. Title: AITA for telling my sister I don't believe she was ever actually pregnant. Turns out I was more right than I realized. Update to a post I made a couple months ago, some of you probably remember it. My sister announced a pregnancy about 7 months ago, had a whole gender reveal, baby shower, the works. 2 weeks ago she announced a miscarriage at 8 months along, no hospital visit anyone can confirm, no death certificate mentioned, just a sudden social media post. My cousin found out she'd canceled a scheduled DNA test with the alleged father just 1 week before the announcement. I told her directly I didn't believe the pregnancy was ever real. She stopped speaking to me. A friend of hers reached out to me privately last week, clearly torn about betraying a confidence, and told me the actual situation. There was no baby, ever, not a miscarriage, not a pregnancy that ended, nothing biological at all. My sister had been staging an entire pregnancy for 7 months, padding included, specifically to pressure a wealthy ex-boyfriend into reconciling before the due date, believing he'd come back once he thought he was about to be a father. When he didn't take the bait the way she expected and started asking for a paternity test instead, she manufactured the miscarriage as an exit, timed specifically before the test could ever happen, and exposed the entire thing. Okay, this is actually insane. At first I thought maybe the timing was just suspicious, but finding out there was never a pregnancy in the first place, that's a completely different level. 7 months, fake baby bump, gender reveal, baby shower, all of it just to try and get an ex-boyfriend back. I honestly can't imagine keeping something like that going for that long without it completely taking over your life. What makes this story even harder, though, is what happens next. Because now you're one of the only people who knows the truth. Her ex still thinks he lost a child. He has no idea the whole thing was made up from the beginning. And that's a horrible position to be in, because if you stay quiet, you're helping keep a huge lie alive. But if you tell him, you're exposing your own sister and blowing your entire family apart. Personally, I don't think I could just pretend I never found out. Something this serious doesn't really stay buried forever. Sooner or later, the truth has a way of coming out. The only question is, who should be the one to tell it? Okay, let's move away from family drama for a second. Or, at least I thought we were. This one was posted on r/confessions. Title: I've been quietly withdrawing from our joint savings for 3 years to fund my sister's rent. What I found out about where that money actually went changed everything. Using a throwaway for obvious reasons, please don't judge me too hard. My younger sister went through a rough divorce a few years back, lost her income stability, and I started pulling money from our joint savings monthly to cover her rent gap without telling my husband. 3 years later, she's stable again, but I've moved almost $30,000 out of our account over that time, and we're now looking at buying a second property, which is about to make the missing funds impossible to explain away. Preparing to finally tell my husband, I asked my sister for exact records of what she'd received, just to have accurate numbers for the conversation. Her numbers didn't match mine. I'd sent significantly more than she said she'd received, a gap of almost $11,000 over the 3 years. After some digging, it turned out her ex-husband, who she still shares a lease-adjacent apartment complex with due to an unrelated custody arrangement, had been intercepting a portion of the transfers for over a year by convincing the property management office he was authorized to collect and forward her rent payments directly, which somehow went unquestioned due to how their original joint lease had been structured. My sister had no idea any of this had been happening either, and thought she'd simply been paying slightly higher rent increases than she actually had been. Okay, This story took a turn I wasn't expecting. At first, I thought the biggest problem here was the fact that she'd been secretly taking money out of their joint savings for 3 years. That's already a huge breach of trust. But then you find out $11,000 never even made it to her sister. And suddenly the whole story changes. If that's actually true, then this isn't just a family secret anymore. Someone was stealing money that was never theirs in the first place. And honestly, that's a much bigger problem than where I thought this story was going. That being said, she still has a really difficult conversation ahead of her. Her husband deserves to know the truth about the money, even if her intentions were good. Helping your sister is one thing. Secretly taking money from a joint account is another. At the same time, I'd be getting my sister involved immediately and talking to the property management company. If her ex really managed to redirect all that money, that's not just shady. That's something that needs to be investigated. Honestly, this feels like two completely separate problems that crashed into each other at the worst possible time. One is a marriage built on a financial secret. The other is someone allegedly stealing thousands of dollars. And now, they've both landed on her at once. I've got one last story for you. And honestly, I think I saved the strangest one for the end. This one was posted over on r/relationships. I found my name on a nameplate at an office I've never worked at. I finally went and asked about it. This is going to sound made up, I promise it isn't. Walking through a business complex downtown, I noticed a nameplate with my exact full name, an uncommon spelling included, at a consulting firm I've never heard of. The front desk confirmed someone with my exact name has had that office for 4 years, listed as a senior partner. I finally went in and asked to speak with them directly. The person who came out looked at me, and I looked at them, and neither of us said anything for a solid few seconds, because we share not just the name, but a strong physical resemblance, close enough that co-workers who walked by clearly assumed we already knew each other. We compared details cautiously, same uncommon last name spelling, going back generations on both sides as far as either of us knew. Same small town origin, 2 states apart from where we each currently live, 1 generation removed. It turns out our grandfathers were brothers who had a falling out decades before either of us was born, severe enough that both sides of the family stopped acknowledging the other existed at all. I asked what the falling out was actually about. He said his side of the family always claimed my grandfather had done something to his. Involving a family business, the 2 brothers ran together before it collapsed, though nobody currently alive on either side seems to know the actual specifics anymore, just the aftermath of total silence that followed it. He said his own father used to get physically uncomfortable if the topic ever came up at all, refusing to explain further even decades later. Neither of us knows if we're looking at an old business dispute or something worse that got quietly buried under a story about a falling out. What we do know is that whatever it was severe enough to erase an entire branch of a family from 2 generations' memory, and now we're standing in front of each other, sharing a name and a face, with nobody left alive who's willing to actually explain why.
Alright, that's all I've got for today. Let me know which story was the craziest in your opinion, because honestly, I still can't decide. And if you've got a Reddit post you think I should cover in the next video, drop it in the comments. I read a lot more of them than you'd probably expect. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Wait a sec, twin. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leaving a lovely comment. It means a lot to me. Thank you so much, guys.